You've got questions, I've got answers. This week, I'm answering some of your biggest questions about mental health. So, let's talk. Hello and welcome. I'm Jeremy Godwin and I share simple ideas for better mental health every Wednesday here on Let's Talk About Mental Health TV and every Sunday on the Let's Talk About Mental Health podcast, which has listeners in 135 countries worldwide. Thank you so much for joining me this episode. This week, I'm actually responding to a shout out that I put on Instagram a few weeks back and I'll put my details on the screen if you'd like to follow me on Instagram. And I asked for things that people wanted to know about mental health. And I had quite a few great questions submitted. I'm going to try to get to as many of them as I possibly can today, but realistically, in the interest of time, there's probably only going to be so many that I can answer. So if I didn't get to yours, or if you've got a question that you would like to ask, feel free to send me your questions on Instagram, or you can leave it in the comments here. And also a quick disclaimer before I begin. I made it very clear to everybody that I suggested send me a question that I would not be identifying anybody. Understandably, this is some sensitive personal stuff, so every single question is going to be anonymous. The first question that I received was, how do I change if I don't even know who I am? My advice here is, if you don't know who you are, that's fine. It means that it's a starting point anyway. At least you're aware of the fact that you're not sure who you are just yet. It may be easier for you to actually focus on what you don't want out of life or what you don't like. And finding what you don't like can quite often help to reveal what you do like, what you do want out of life. It's also really important to take some time to focus on your self-awareness. Now, that's something that I've talked about quite a fair bit in multiple different things, but I also did a podcast episode on it back in episode 62, so I'll link to that in the description below. Just take some time to really get to know yourself, journaling, all of those types of things, reflection activities. Again, reflection's a big one that I talk about a lot, and I covered that in episode 12 of the podcast. Take your time, and if you need to, focus on the things that you don't like before you try to push yourself to identify what you do want and who you actually are. The next question is, can you talk about how to deal with impostor syndrome? This is an interesting one that's come up quite a few times before, and it's one that, look, I've struggled with this previously, and every now and then, especially if I'm in a low place in general, the impostor syndrome thing can easily creep in. There's a couple of things here first, which is really about your self-esteem and getting to know who you are. Self-esteem I talked about in episode 43 of the podcast. If you know who you are, and know what your strengths are, it is easier when you are faced with imposter syndrome to actually then challenge those thoughts. Because thoughts are not facts. Thoughts are very often our fears and insecurities just manifesting. And that's all imposter syndrome is. It is your fear of being caught out for not knowing what the hell you're talking about. You know, I do it all the time. I've been, well, not all the time, but I've been in situations before where I've been talking to people and especially if you talk to somebody who has a doctorate in mental health, for example, and it can make me, sometimes if I'm in not a great headspace, it can make me feel a little insecure. What I do is I remind myself that I am good at what I do and I have something valuable to add to the world. And that is what I would encourage you to do. I even had a period of time a few months ago where I was a little bit challenged with a few things. I even wrote that out on a post-it note and stuck it up next to my computer. And every time I sat here doing my work, it was actually, if I was doubting myself, I looked over and I could see that reminder to myself. I'm good at what I do and I know what I'm talking about. And I have the right, and I have earned the right to be able to do whatever it is that I'm doing. So just think about what are those things. And ultimately, the short answer of this one as well is, imposter syndrome is about negative thoughts manifesting, and you only get rid of negative thoughts by refocusing on positive thoughts. So look for the positives and refocus on those. My next question that I received is how to deal with bipolar disorder in adult children. So I'm assuming with this one that the bipolar disorder has been diagnosed, and so realistically, whether it's, whether one of your children has bipolar or if they've got depression, anxiety, a whole bunch of other conditions, it doesn't matter. It's about love. It's about listening. It's about providing support, which in fact I did an episode about supporting others on the podcast, which was episode 79. And I don't think it's necessarily a case of having to adapt your approach because of bipolar disorder or whatever. It's about being aware, and so educating yourself on what the different manifestations of the condition might be. And it's about providing support and love and kindness. You know, we all go through challenges in life. And if you think about it from the perspective of what would happen if one of your children were to lose a limb or to come down with a severe disease, what would you do? Well, you would be there for them. You would shower them with love and kindness and support. And maybe they would have hard days where they weren't willing to accept that. And maybe they would have days where that's what they actually need and that's what they embrace. It's no different with mental health. So really be there for them as much as you can. And check out that episode, which I'll link to in the description as well, for some more guidance on supporting others. My next question is, how do we change our mindset and improve our mental health and well-being after narcissistic abuse? I'm going to answer this from the perspective of abuse in general. You are not responsible for what somebody else did to you. And so you have one of two choices about where you go to from here. You can either let those experiences reduce you and keep you weak and fearful, or you can choose to rise above them and to be the very best version of yourself possible. I know I say that a lot here and on the podcast, but you need to show yourself love and patience and kindness, just like what I said for previous point. And it really is about reminding yourself on a daily basis that you are okay. You get the support that you need, and I always recommend working with somebody external, so a professional, to provide you with objective support. But get that support and really focus on what it is that you can do to take from that experience and take back your power. Because if your power has been taken away from you, you can feel really shit, is probably the best way to describe it. So take little steps every single day to take back your power and to feel a little less shit every day. You will be okay. It takes time, effort, and perseverance, like all things. The next question is, what's the deal with antidepressants? I've recently been prescribed them and I'm not sure if I should go on them. Antidepressants. Okay, so full disclosure, I spent 4 years, something like that, on quite heavy antidepressants, quite heavy dosage. And for me, it was what saved me. However, there's a big however. They had horrendous side effects, massive weight gain, loss of libido, and what I could only describe as just a complete lack of joy. So what antidepressants do, sort of in generalized explanation here, but what they sort of generally do is they even out your emotions. So you don't have the big dips like of depression necessarily that you would have, but it also evens out the higher end emotions of happiness and joy and those types of things. So I went through a period of time for several years where and really bad memory issues. I just remembered that. I went through a period of time for several years where I just did not experience happiness. I didn't experience severe sadness, but I just didn't really feel that much at all. And look, maybe that was the price that I had to pay for dealing with the severity of my depression and anxiety at the time, but it wasn't something for me that was long-term sustainable. And so I had to work with my doctor to get off the antidepressants, and that was just a friggin' nightmare. It took, between that and the anti-anxiety medication, it took me, I think, almost like 2 years to wean myself off them, and I had to do it really, really slowly, and it was painful. It was every time you changed the medication, you had to readapt and you go through weeks, if not months, of just really horrendous, shitty feelings. And it's like, I mean, look, I've never been addicted to crack, but it's what I imagine it'd be like to try to get off crack. So it was really, really tough. And so why I'm telling you all of that is not just to talk about me, but to really say, think really long and hard before you make a decision about taking antidepressants. They are absolutely fantastic tools and part of a broad set of options for treatment. But I don't think that they should be used in isolation. I think that therapy is an essential part of that, as is doing your own things on top of the medication and the therapy. So that's the bit that I focus on in these videos and in my podcast. So what am I saying? What I'm trying to say here is very much about go into it eyes open and know that there are potentially side effects depending on your biology and your response, but also understand that some doctors can prescribe antidepressants like they're prescribing candy from a piñata, and it is not something that I think that you should enter into lightly. So it is very much about having honest conversations with your doctor, working with them, and just thinking about the bigger picture. So there might be a vague answer, but basically what I'm saying is approach it thoughtfully. The next question is, what about dealing with birthday blues? This is one that I know well. It's funny, I'm filming this in the middle of June, but it won't go out until July, but my birthday's in early July. And I was just talking to my partner this morning about making sure that I have plans in place for my birthday, because I just don't want to be in that headspace. And the thing is, sometimes birthdays can trigger us to reflect on where we're not happy with things, or the relationships that maybe aren't in our life anymore, or to the extent that we want them to be. There's 1,001 different things that can potentially trigger us, but the birthday blues are a real thing for a lot of people. I think there's a couple of ways that you can approach it. I think, first of all, being aware of it is really important, and taking the time to sort of dig into what is it that it triggers for you. And I think also having plans in place, but also making that day about you and your self-care. Self-care is a topic I talk about a lot. I did an episode on it back in episode 6 of the podcast, which I'll link to down below. You know what? Take care of yourself. I could go into a really long-winded answer here, but it's your birthday. You do what you want to do. Take care of yourself and make it about you. If that means that you want to go spend it with people, then do that. If that means you want to spend it on your own and, turn your phone on to silent and ignore all notifications, do that. It's about you. And just remember, a birthday is only one day out of 365 a year. And it's literally just a number. It doesn't really define anything other than just the anniversary of our trip around the sun. So just put it into context and be kind to yourself and look after yourself on your birthday. So the next question is, how do I deal with social media addiction? I've actually talked about social media a fair bit. In fact, I did a video on social media and better mental health, which I will link to. I also covered habits in the podcast in episode 29, and episode 34 of the podcast was all about addiction. I guess probably the main thing that I would recommend, aside from checking out those for more detail, but if there were one thing that I could say really simply, social media is not real life. And so when you remind yourself of that, you begin to look at it a bit differently. I used to live my life on Facebook, well, back when Facebook was a thing, and the reality is that you cannot maintain solid connections, quality connections with people just via Facebook. And, it's like Instagram. People are presenting one very particular part of their lives. They're not showing you their bills or the issues that they have with the plumbing or all of those types of things. It's, for a lot of people, it's a very curated approach of celebrating the best in life, which is nice, but that's not real life. So just remind yourself of that. Social media is not real life, and if you are finding that you are dealing with addiction, it is as serious as any kind of addiction. So take steps accordingly, get support, and like I said, you can reference those things that I've covered previously as well. The next question is, I have severe social anxiety in school, but outside of school, I don't. Is this normal? The answer is absolutely. I kind of balk at the word normal a little bit because there is no normal. So let me just clarify what I mean by that. There are nearly 8 billion of us on this planet, so the idea of normal isn't actually, like, it doesn't exist. It's like saying that perfect is a thing, because perfect doesn't exist. Normal is just a very particular view of things. So I'll get off. That's not the question that you asked, and I'm getting on a soapbox here. So, severe social anxiety at school. You're in a different environment at school. So, for example, it's common that people might be really anxious at work, but at home feel completely fine. And it's just part of life. What it says to me is that the environment is contributing to that particular situation. So whether that's the people that you're around, whether that is the school itself, the teachers, their approaches, the school methodology, all of those different things. And then you've also got to bear in mind that in a school or a university or college environment, whichever level you're at, there is a pressure to perform. And so what I would encourage you to do is really think about what is it that's triggering that social anxiety. Is it about how you're being viewed by your peers? Is it about the pressure that you're having in school? What is it? And understand what that is so that you can then address it. Take your time with things, especially social anxiety can be a real pain in the backside. And I will do an episode on that in the future as well, probably in a couple of months' time. Because it is a much deeper conversation that we kind of need to have, I think, around mental health and social anxiety. But just remember that if your social anxiety is being triggered because of the people that are around you, then focus on people who like you for you, and for everybody else, to hell with them if they don't like you for you. The last question is how to address and embrace things that we don't like about ourselves. I've talked in quite a few episodes about the relationship that you have with yourself. I covered in the podcast episode 78 about self-worth, episode 9 about self-talk in terms of how you talk to yourself, episode 43 around self-esteem, 35 on insecurity, and 36 on acceptance. I'm sure there's probably some others in there as well. Hopefully you can see from all of those episodes that the point here is that, yeah, there's content around that. But the point here is that your relationship with yourself is a really, really vital and important one. And being able to treat yourself with respect and kindness and love is the most fundamental aspect of good mental health. Because if you can't love yourself, how will anybody else? I mean, I know I just ripped off RuPaul there, but seriously, how can you expect anybody else to love you if you're unable to love you? So how do you deal with that? The things that you don't like about yourself? Well, the reality is the more you focus on stuff that you don't like, the more you see. So my viewpoint here is to change your focus. Your focus should be on the things that you like about yourself, the things that you are positive about. You know, I've talked openly before about challenges that I have with things, dealing with my weight issues on camera. You know, all of that stuff really did a bit of a number in my head, but you know what? I could either focus on that repeatedly, or I can continue to steer myself back to the fact that I love what I do. And so if I'm focusing on the positives and I'm focusing on what I can contribute, regardless of those things that I may not feel great about, it makes it easier with time, effort, and perseverance to slowly take those things out of the focus and refocus on the positive. That's it for this week. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you made it all the way to the end of this video, leave me one of those question mark and exclamation mark emojis and give this video a like. Watch this video next for why we really need to talk more about mental health, and subscribe to the channel for more great content every Wednesday. Also catch the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more every Sunday. Thank you so much for joining me today. Take care of yourself and talk to you next time.